Portugal is one of those countries that everyone thinks they know. Medieval castles, cities covered in tiles, famous sweets, and a history full of kings, caravels, and voyages that changed the map of the world. But this past also has a much darker side. At various points in history, Portugal tried to erase parts of itself. It persecuted minorities, expelled entire families, and banned traditions that did not fit with the kingdom's official agenda. But not everyone accepted disappearing. In the interior of the country, there is a place where, for centuries, people went to mass, lit candles for saints, and baptized their children. But inside their homes, they followed a different calendar, with different rules and a different God. For more than 500 years, this community lived in absolute silence. And that is why today, Bello Mundo will take you to the interior of Portugal to visit Belmonte, the country's most secret community. Belmonte is located in central Portugal, in the highest mountain range in the country. Cold all year round, famous cheese and a bunch of small villages clinging to the valleys. Nearby flows the Zezre River. It rises in the mountains and descends through small inland towns until it joins the Tagus, Portugal's most important river. When you climb up to the castle and calmly look at the landscape, you understand why this place has always been considered strategic. The river shapes everything around it, defining the paths, access, and the very position of the city. Even this castle, which still stands today looking like something out of a movie, is not there by chance. It was built as a fortress, precisely to guard the passage, control routes, and protect the region. It was around this defensive function that the village grew. Always small, always discreet, always linked to this role. And here's another interesting fact about the place. It was also there that Pedro Álvares Cabral was born, the same man we learn about in books as the discoverer of Brazil. His family was important in the village, held positions of power, and was influential. To this day, Belmonte remembers this with a statue, a plaque with his name, and a museum. Even so, the city never became anything more than a village. It was never a capital, never became a center of commerce. It remained small, with a square, a fair, a simple market, and that kind of life where everyone knows each other. And it was precisely because it was like this, discreet and far from the big centers, that it ended up becoming a hiding place. While Portugal claimed to be a Catholic country, some families in Belmonte practiced another faith. They were Jewish families. They lit candles in secret, kept special bread in a wooden box, and fasted on different dates. They prayed to another god, but without saying his name. Because they couldn't. Because it was dangerous. Over time, this group became increasingly closed off. It was a story that no one outside the community saw, and it remained hidden for centuries. And if you are wondering why a community with such strong values and traditions had to hide for so long, the answer lies in the past. And it forces us to face one of the darkest chapters in the history of Portugal. Even though it was an officially Catholic country, Portugal had long periods when Jews were able to live without direct repression. They did not have the same rights as Christians, but they were not openly persecuted either. It was a delicate balance, sustained more by economic necessity and custom than by official tolerance. The first groups arrived in ancient times, probably along with the Romans. And over the centuries, other waves came, fleeing wars, persecution, or just looking for a better place to live. In the Middle Ages, many people settled in small villages, commercial cities, and border regions. Gradually, Jews spread throughout the territory and became part of the country's life. They worked as doctors, translators, merchants, and artisans. Some even acted as tax collectors at the behest of the king himself. They were educated people, with access to writing and other languages. In many places, they were seen as essential to the economy and local administration. Therefore, by the 15th century, Portugal already had a strong, well-organized Jewish community, one of the most important in Europe at that time. But everything began to change when neighboring Spain decided to tighten the noose. In 1492, the Catholic monarchs signed the decree of expulsion. All Jews had to leave Spanish territory or be forcibly converted. Many people fled, and the most logical destination was Portugal, right next door. The Portuguese king at the time, Dom Juan II, allowed thousands of families to enter, but it was a short-term permit. They paid to stay, had some rights, but were under surveillance. Shortly thereafter, Dom Juan died and Dom Manuel took over. And then the situation went awry. Dom Manuel wanted to marry the daughter of the kings of Spain, and one of the requirements was that he also expel the Jews, which he did. So in 1497, he signed the decree. But unlike what happened in Spain, in Portugal, leaving was made difficult on purpose. Instead of allowing families to leave, many people were forcibly baptized. Thousands of children were taken from their parents, synagogues were closed, and those who remained came to be called New Christians. But the conversion was not complete, nor was it sincere. At home, many families tried to maintain their original faith. They followed the Jewish calendar. They avoided certain foods. They lit candles on specific days. But everything was done in secret. Any visible sign could be interpreted as heresy. That is why, years later, the Church pressed for and succeeded in establishing the Inquisition in Portugal. The tribunal was officially created in 1536, and its main focus was precisely that: to watch over new Christians who seemed too strange. And then a climate of fear began. Denunciations could come from anyone: a neighbor, a relative, a stranger. It was enough to accuse someone of practicing ancient rituals for the tribunal to begin an investigation. This could result in imprisonment, torture, confiscation of property, or even death at the stake. In large cities such as Lisbon, Évora, and Coimbra, surveillance was constant. Many people were arrested on the spot, with no chance to defend themselves. In more remote regions, such as Serra da Estrela, control was less strict, and that's where some groups found loopholes to survive. Belmonte was one of those exceptions. Isolated, far from the centers of the Inquisition, without political importance, a small village where it was possible to hide. Over the centuries, no one there claimed to be Jewish in public. The term was too dangerous. But behind closed doors, some practices remained very much alive, and it is in this silent routine that this story becomes even more impressive. As they could not keep anything obvious, the rituals were adapted over the centuries. What could go unnoticed continued. What attracted too much attention was abandoned. Thus, faith became a set of small gestures, almost invisible to those who did not know what they were seeing. It was a discrete practice built on memory and repetition. In this scenario, women played a central role. They were the ones who kept the calendar, took care of the food, prepared the special bread, decided when to light the candles, and taught the children. Nothing was written down. Nothing was read. Everything was passed on through speech, observation, and routine. If a mother failed to teach, an entire tradition could disappear right there. Bread is a good example of this. On certain dates, they would prepare unleavened bread, similar to what Jews make for Passover. But in Belmonte, this bread was not consumed as a ritual meal. It was kept. It was stored in wooden boxes, sometimes for years, as if it were a spiritual protection for the home. The symbol remained, even when the complete ritual could no longer exist in the traditional way. And this is where one of the most delicate points of all comes in, which is the Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat. In Judaism, the holy day always begins at sunset on Friday and ends at sunset on Saturday. The first gesture of this beginning is to light the candles. It is not a social custom. It is a religious commandment. Every Friday, at the same time, in the same sequence. After that come other important rules. During Shabbat, one does not work. One does not use tools. One does not light a fire. Therefore, food must be ready before Friday ends. On Saturday, the house enters into rest, and that is precisely where the danger lay. Because lighting candles at home in Portugal was something everyone did. Cooking beforehand was not unusual either. What gave it away was the pattern. Every Friday at the same time, every week, avoiding fire on Saturday. Every week, no one working on that day. This set of habits only existed within Judaism. Therefore, in Belmonte, these rituals continued, but completely camouflaged. Candles were lit in discreet places in the house. Food was prepared without arousing suspicion. And the Sabbath rest had to appear to be just a coincidence, or often not exist at all. Shabbat continued to exist, but had to be adapted. Prayers also changed over time. They began to be said in Portuguese, not Hebrew. Many words were changed over the centuries. Some phrases sounded like Christian prayers, but the intention was different. It was what remained after generations without a synagogue, without a book, and without a rabbi. Meanwhile, outside, these same people lived as Catholics. They went to Mass, participated in processions, baptized their children, and were married in church. It was a double life. Outside the home, one faith. Inside the home, another. To avoid any kind of suspicion, the community became increasingly closed off. Marriages began to take place almost exclusively between the same families. It was a way of ensuring that customs were not lost. Only those who grew up there understood the meaning of certain gestures, certain dates, certain choices. This isolation lasted for centuries, and over time it ended up creating a Judaism of its own, different from that practiced in other parts of the world. Without contact with other communities, some rules changed, others were lost, and some became even older than anywhere else. The most impressive thing is that they managed to keep all this without being discovered. Belmonte became a point off the religious map, a community that lived its faith in absolute silence, believing that this was necessary for survival. And this silence only began to be broken at the beginning of the 20th century. In the middle of the 20s, an engineer named Samuel Schwartz appeared in the Serra da Estrela region. He was Jewish, born in Poland, and had come to Portugal because of a project in the tungsten mines, a very valuable ore at the time. Tungsten was used in the manufacture of resistant metal alloys, including industrial parts and military equipment. Portugal had some of the largest reserves in Europe, which attracted engineers from various countries. However, Schwartz ended up finding something else there besides ore. During his visits to the villages in the region, he noticed that Belmonte seemed different. The residents declared themselves Catholic like everyone else, but there was a way of life that did not entirely fit with traditional Catholicism. Some practices, some dates, and certain habits seemed out of place, as if they came from a history too ancient to have been learned there. Gradually, Schwartz realized that those habits, however distorted they might seem, still bore traces of Jewish tradition. He talked to families, recorded their stories, and made a discovery that shocked even him. Those people thought they were alone in the world. They believed that all Jews had been exterminated, and that only the memory preserved by their own ancestors remained. What he found there was what is now called crypto-Judaism, a faith passed down in the dark, hidden for generations, adapted to fear and silence. Schwartz wrote books, published articles abroad, and revealed to the world that, in the middle of the 20th century, there was still a living Jewish community in the heart of Portugal. But within the village, little changed. The country still lived under a Catholic-based dictatorship, so religious freedom was minimal. Assuming a non-standard identity could bring real problems, so they continued as they always had, discreet, closed, protecting what they had. Only after the Carnation Revolution in 1974 did the environment begin to change. The country opened up, researchers returned, and rabbis arrived in the village. And little by little, the residents of Belmonte began to discover that they were not alone, and that what they had preserved could reconnect with Judaism in the rest of the world. In the 90s, finally, the first active synagogue in the region in centuries was born there. Small, simple, but symbolic. For the first time, lighting a candle was no longer a hidden act. It was an act of remembrance, of pride, and of reconnecting with their own history. From then on, the community ceased to exist only within their homes. It also began to exist on the map. But the transformation did not stop there. Over time, Belmonte understood that this whole story was not just an internal matter for the Jewish community. It was also an opportunity to tell a forgotten part of Portugal's own history, and of course to attract visitors. The village invested in a series of museums, forming almost a cultural circuit. Among them is the Jewish Museum of Belmonte, which opened in the mid-2000s. There, visitors can find documents, religious objects, accounts of the Inquisition, stories of new Christians, and, above all, the narrative of how this community managed to stay alive in silence for centuries. The synagogue also became part of this new moment. When not in religious use, it welcomes small groups of visitors, people who want to understand how that hidden Judaism worked and how it reconnected with the rest of the world. With this movement, the city began to change economically. Inns appeared, restaurants geared toward outsiders, shops with products related to Jewish culture, books, souvenirs. Part of the local economy began to revolve around this. Belmonte never became a mass tourist town. It remains small. It remains calm. But now it welcomes a different kind of visitor who comes with a different interest. They don't just come to see the castle. They come to understand the history that was locked away for centuries. Even with all this activity, the Jewish community remains reserved. They participate, they help tell the story, but they do not expose their own lives as a spectacle. There is a limit, and that limit comes precisely from the past they carry with them. The city has changed, the secret has come to light, but their way of life remains marked by caution and discretion, and that is what makes Belmonte a place unlike any other in Portugal. And that is why it was, and continues to be, one of the most secretive communities in the country. Had you heard of Belmonte before, or was this the first time you heard about this story? Tell us in the comments what surprised you most about this video. If you enjoyed the content, leave your like, share it, and of course, don't forget to activate the new hyper feature. This helps the channel gain visibility and continue bringing you these unbelievable trips through our Bello Mundo. See you next time.